Welcome back to The Blitz. I'm your host, Nathan Eloquent, and today we're going to look at some critical reading parts, particularly the vocab section. As a general overview, studying for a vocab section like you would a spelling bee isn't exactly going to give you the tools you need to succeed on the test, because you're never going to memorize all the words, and you're definitely not going to be prepared for the exact sentences they give you. So instead, let's look at some tools we can use to beat the vocab section. Okay, so the vocab section of the SAT is probably my favorite part to teach, because as far as it goes, it is one of the easiest things to get shortcuts to. The SAT does such a bad job of testing vocabulary, or rather any standardized test is so difficult at testing reading ability and usage of grammar, that it makes it easy for you to come up with shortcuts to get through this test. That's what this guide is for. So let's get started. The first thing that you're going to see whenever you enter a critical reading section is what we're working on today, which is the vocabulary section. There are two different types of questions that involve filling in a blank of some sort. Here we have some practice questions that I'm not going to read to you, but that demonstrate that for us. You can see that all of these, it starts with a sentence that has either one or two blanks, and then it goes into 5 different options, A through E, with certain words that you can use to fill in that blank. Wow, that was awesome. For those of you that don't know, I live in Austin, Texas, and having a thunderstorm like this is pretty sweet, so a little respect to the clouds for what they did just then. Anyway, so there are a lot of different words that you can use for these questions, but they only give you 5. So what the instructions clearly state is that you need to choose the best word that fits a sentence, and it says it right here. And it'll say it on every single vocab section in the test. Since there are 3 critical reading sections, or maybe 4, you're going to get around 22 to 32 questions, because each of which are ascending in difficulty throughout each section. So question number 1 in the first critical reading section will be about the same difficulty as question 1 in the next reading section that you have, and they'll get harder as they go along. So it's really important that you know certain tools to solve these questions. Here are the 2 different types of questions that you're going to encounter. The first one we're going to be looking at is vocabulary and context. Now, these questions, I have one phrase here for you, but these questions are going to be your straight up vocabulary quizzing bee. And these can be really frustrating because they use difficult words, ones that aren't frequently used. And the only way for you to know how they work is to, 1, understand the context within the sentence, and 2, understand enough of the word through vocabulary roots or just the straight up definition that you can apply it correctly. Here's an example of a simpler question that you're going to come across, and I phrase it in this way for a specific reason. This is a Nathan Eloquent original. So this says Bob, A or an, blank, at heart, like to give money to struggling charities. Now, I'm going to solve this question incorrectly, and then I'm going to show you how you're supposed to solve it. So we read the question, then we look at the answers. So we have engineer, we have philosopher, we have philanthropist, and we have a teacher, and we have a miser. So we think and we go, okay, so how are we going to make this work? So a Bob, a blank, like to give. So the only thing we know about Bob, besides his name, is the fact that he likes to give money to struggling charities. So, as far as I know, maybe I don't know the definition of the word, but I've heard the word philanthropist, and they seem to be giving away money to things. So, maybe they give away money to charities. At least it sounds better than these other options, but let's go in and see what we can do. An engineer, that doesn't make sense, so we'll say no. A philosopher, I don't know, maybe a philosopher would be wise enough to give money. I'll give that a maybe. A philanthropist, that seems right. From what I remember, just watching the news or whatever, I think a philanthropist is the option. So I'm going to give it a check. I think that's the right answer. A teacher could do it. And a miser, you know what, I don't really know what that is, so I'll give that a maybe. And then, because the best option is philanthropist, I'm going to choose C, philanthropist. And in this case, that happens to be the correct answer. But questions are not going to be this straightforward and simple. So let me tell you exactly how to solve it. But before I do that, this is the setup of every single vocabulary and context question. First, there's always going to be 2 clauses. Even if they're not separated by a comma, they're going to be separated by a conjunction or something that makes it into 2 statements. So let's just look at the one up here. It says, Bob, a blank at heart. That's the first statement. You might as well take out this comma and rephrase it. Bob is a blank at heart. The second statement is going to affirm that statement by rephrasing it. He liked to give money to struggling charities. So in this case, we know that the second is an affirmation of the first, and so one is going to define the other. In other words, the phrase, like to give money, that's pretty much going to define what he is. Otherwise, they wouldn't put it in the sentence. They're never going to give you extraneous information or extra information. So, we know that he liked to give money. We're trying to find a word that fits that. We look through these. Do engineers give money? Teachers? I guess. Miser? I don't know what that means. Philosopher? Philanthropist. So, that's one way of looking at it. The next thing is, there are always two good answers. Good-ish answers. You're going to look at this, and you're going to say, okay, well, this is good, but this is also good too. And in this case, I tried to do it. A philosopher and a philanthropist, you might think that a philosopher, being really wise, or coming from the Greek root for love, would give away money. I mean, I guess that can make sense. But the reality is that it's just a good answer, and that like every single vocab question you come across, it comes down to choosing the best answer. There's always going to be good answers. So basically, what it comes down to is, if you see a good answer, don't just circle it right away. Look at all the answers before making your choice, because there might be one that's better. Now, here's good news for you. There are also two bad answers. Ones that just don't even make a whole lot of sense in the context. They're not going to be opposites or negatives, but they're going to be bad. An engineer, that doesn't make much sense. A teacher, not really. So you can X those out pretty quickly. Now, this is interesting. A lot of these questions, though not most of them, I'd say about 30% if I were guessing, is going to have an opposite. A word that sits in there that says exactly the opposite of what the answer is supposed to say, because some of these questions might have a negative statement in it. For example, this question could have said, Bob, a blank at heart, never liked to give money to struggling charities. And in that case, miser would be your answer, because miser is defined as someone who likes to hoard money and never give it away. So, what we look at here is, instead of these opposites or of these negatives, we need to keep in mind if there are any negatives, because then it might give us a completely different answer in the outcome. So, this is the setup of these problems. Keep that in mind. Remember, one clause is always going to define another. They can't give you a sentence with a blank unless they give you enough information to fill in that blank, right? There are going to be two good answers, so choose the best answer. Let me write that. Best answer. There are also going to be two bad answers, but there's also going to be a negative, an opposite in some of these, so be careful about that. I'm going to teach you how to win, and I'm sure you've been reading ahead and finding out what on earth this donut stands for. This is going to be a way for you to remember how to solve vocabulary questions. The option, donut. I started writing these and then I realized it would be cool to turn it into an acronym, and I already had D, so I had to choose a word that started with D, and this was a good option. So, donut it is. This is how you win these questions. First, do not look at the answers. I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. Then, you're going to choose your best option, narrow it down, utilize your conjunctions, and there's your answer. I didn't have a way to finish the word, so there's your answer. I'm going to show you how this works. Back up to the top. Pretend we know nothing about this question. Bob, a blank at heart, liked to give money to struggling charities. Cover up the answers immediately. I've seen people go into SATs and use their hands. You can tell if they're using this technique because they use their hands to cover up the answers, because once you read a word, sometimes it sticks. Sometimes you get the wrong impression of it. It sounds good even though it's not correct, and then you end up using it wrongly and getting the question wrong. So, here we go. Bob, a blank at heart, liked to give money to struggling charities. It's really easy. You think, like to give money to struggling charities, give money, a generous person. So what you do is, while covering it up, you write write it up here. You can write anywhere on the test you want. A generous person. I mean, you don't have to have a fancy word for that. So, someone that likes to give away money. Then, what you do is, you lift up the answers. You try to find a word that matches your definition. Is an engineer by definition generous? Not really. Philosopher? Not really. Philosophers aren't generous. Teachers? No. Misers? You don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound like it. And so, you go back to philanthropists and you think that might be your answer. Okay? So, you didn't look at the questions, and then you found your best option, a generous person. If that was one of the answers, good job, you already had it. I've actually come across that a few times in my practice tests. Then, you narrow it down to the correct answer, like we just did. The rule of elimination is extremely powerful. Eliminate engineer. Eliminate philosopher. Eliminate teacher. Don't know what that is? Put a question mark. Don't eliminate unless you're sure. And then you're comparing between these two. Now, it's important that you utilize your conjunctions. In this one, we just have a clause. It's an appositive that describes Bob, and then it has a statement that affirms that statement, like we were talking about over here. In other words, in other sentences, they're going to be an and, a but, an or, a nor, a neither, a then, an although, a since, an in conclusion, an exception. So you're going to be able to use those words to your advantage. In this case, we're just using one to affirm the other, and so we think, okay, yes, this would make sense because he's giving money to charities. Then you find the one that makes the best sense. You might have to guess. If you don't know what miser is, you guess philanthropist because it makes sense. Maybe you utilize your roots right here, and then you're done. So you just come up with the right answer, and you use donut. All nice and dandy. So let's look at some logic-based questions. So what we just looked at was vocabulary and context. It's a sentence. Choose the correct vocabulary word. This is very different, and these questions are so much better than vocab, because in vocab, you have to walk in with a good knowledge of your vocabulary words. It's really frustrating to have to memorize so many words for these tests. But logic-based questions, they give you 100% of the information that you need in the question. So we're going to look at the secrets for solving these questions. This is an example of a to-blank logic-based question. Although scary movies are typically blank for kids, my children found this one quite blank. So, the first thing you need to do, I'm going to read the answers to you in a sec. Here's the setup of most of these questions. Once again, two clauses, one which defines the other. You have, although they are this, my children found it this. And we're going to talk about buzzwords in a second, which define which direction you're going, positive or negative, with these statements. Most of these questions are going to have the first blank correct, have an answer where the first blank is correct and the second one is wrong, where the first one is wrong and the second one's correct, and where one of them is completely irrelevant. It's not wrong, but it doesn't make sense in the sentence. It doesn't apply to one of the other terms. And then there's going to be, you know, a random one in there. Let's illustrate that with this question. Although scary movies are typically blank for kids, my children found this one quite blank. So we have the word scary. This makes you think that typically scary movies would be, I don't know, scary. So using the method we had before, we choose the method, we put in the word that we think best fits. My children found this one quite, well, they probably didn't find it scary, otherwise the sentence would be worded this way. So let's say they found it quite funny. Scary and funny, really easy words. You don't have to go big words on this. Now, let's look over here. The first blank is on this left side, and the second blank is represented by this right side. So if only one of the two words is wrong, eliminate it. There's no way that it's going to be the correct answer. Let's look over here. Although scary movies are typically scary, so we have harmful, satisfying, realistic, disturbing, disastrous. Satisfying is probably not correct. We can eliminate this immediately. Realistic, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm going to give it a second chance here. The others make sense. Harmful, disturbing, disastrous, those could work. Now, the second statement. My children found this one quite funny, or humorous, or cool. It doesn't really matter. So we look at these right blanks. Terrifying? Probably not. Enjoyable, pleasant, long-lasting? Yeah, this doesn't make much sense, but we'll give it a second chance. So we were only looking with three options, and we really haven't even started thinking about the definitions of these words yet. So let's look at the best answer. Once again, the best answer. We know that because the scary movies typically are scary and they find it funny, we're going to find words that look like that. Realistic doesn't make sense, long-lasting doesn't make sense, so we know that we can choose probably the best answer here, which is disturbing and pleasant. And just in case, if you want to, you can go back in and read it out to see if it makes sense. Although scary movies are typically disturbing for kids, my children found this one quite pleasant. That makes sense. We circle it, we have our answer. Now, how to win? Believe it or not, it's the exact same method as before. So here's our donut. I didn't write it out because I wanted to see if you guys could remember it. Do you know how to solve these questions using the donut system? I feel like Dora. Okay, so I'm going to write it out for you. First one is don't look. When you look at your answers, sometimes it'll change the meaning of the original sentence. And the sentence up here is way more important than the answers down here. So, don't look just yet. Find your best option, option A. Choose the words that you think would work. Scary and funny, simple words. Then, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting my own acronym. That's okay, I just made it today. Ah, that's right. So you're going to narrow it down to your best option. We used elimination to start with the left blank and then go to the right blank, and we found three options left. And out of those, we utilized the conjunctions, or in this case the word although, to find out that they're opposites, and found out that this one was the one that made the most sense, and then, there's our answer. So, remember donut. Clearly I didn't. But remember donut and it'll make it a lot easier for you to solve these in the future. Logic-based questions. Now, the easiest thing for you to remember when going to these tests are the buzzwords. You're going to have a statement, and in that statement, one clause is defining another, whether it's vocab questions or logic-based questions. One statement is going to define another. So what you need to be able to do is be ready for words that'll come up that'll tell you if it is positive, if they're the same, or if it's negative, if the second one negates the first, if it's the opposite the first. So these are some words that you can look at. When a sentence has and, so, because, according to, since, which, also, both, or including, it's usually going to be the same definition or a similar term. So taking this sentence, instead of although, this could have been since. You change one word and the entire sentence changes its meaning and gives you a different answer. Since scary movies are typically scary for kids, my children found this one quite, I don't know, scary. It changed it from an opposite to a positive. And then we would go down here and find something like satisfying and, the opposite, harmful and terrifying. You get the exact opposite definition from the changing of one word. So you got to keep those in mind. Now we have those negatives, and you saw one of those earlier. But, although, despite, regardless, even though, nevertheless, yet, with a no at the end of that, neither, excluding, or obviously no, or not, those are all going to give you opposites. So please, please, please go into sentences, go into questions, and look for those words. Now, we've completely covered everything you need to know about the vocab section. Why don't we give it a shot? I have some sample questions for you, and then I'm going to teach you how to study for these questions in a second. These come straight off of the SAT test from last year. So, here's your first example. Because King Philip's desire to make Spain the dominant power in 16th century Europe ran counter to Queen Elizabeth's insistence on autonomy for England, blah 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 blah. Oy vey, there's so many words in here. What we know from common grammar use is that there's a subject and there's a verb. So, because, so we know that this is going to be an affirmative or a positive. Because he had a desire, it ran counter, this is important, to someone else, then you're done. Because his desire ran counter to this, we know that it's going up against something. So that's pretty easy. You look at these words and you can find them out. Now, we're covering the option, it's probably too big. We're covering the answers here. Don't look. Hopefully you didn't look by now. Don't go back and look. Now I know you're going to go back and look. There are two blanks. It says blank was blank. Now, when we're looking at this, we've got to expect that there's going to be some sort of, I don't know, conflict between the two. So, he wants something, she wants something, it runs counter, so I'm going to choose the word conflict as my ideal choice. Conflict was inevitable, would really be what I choose. In fact, I think that's a common phrase. Conflict was inevitable. Inevitable meaning it was going to happen no matter what. I mean, you could choose a different word. You could choose like automatic or going to happen. It's really not, it doesn't matter. But now you know kind of what you're looking for out of your answer. We open this up. Reconciliation was assured. So our first word, conflict, that doesn't work with reconciliation. Warfare, oh, that actually works out. Ruination, yeah. Conflict, yes. The second is inevitable or automatic. So we're looking at avoidable. Inevitable is actually the opposite of that, so let's get rid of that. Impossible, that's also in one way, the opposite of that. So that actually, oh gosh. So yeah, we have conflict and we have inevitable. I promise, I printed these off the internet, but I actually really didn't look at the answers ahead of time. So there you go. You have conflict and you have inevitable. So we have a really good answer right here. Let's just go ahead and say that if you have selected your option A and it actually matches one of the answers, you know you're on the right path. So make sure you focus on those best answers. This makes sense because when we look at the sentence, it runs counter. There will be a conflict, and it says that conflict was going to be inevitable because of that insistence on the same stuff. Dominant power and autonomy. So there you go. Now time for another question along those lines. Once again, this is another logic-based question. Although some think that the terms bug and insect are blank, the former term actually refers to blank group of insects. Although some of the terms think, okay, well, so first of all, we found our buzzword, boom. Although, it's going to be the opposite. So even though we don't have the word in the blank, we know that it's going to be different than what's in the first clause. This is the first clause, and then the second clause begins here. So let's solve this. Although some think that the terms bug and insect are something, not looking at the answers, covering it up, Although something bug and insect are the same or different, I mean, we don't know. The former term actually refers to blank group of insect. Oh, I see. So we've got something a little difficult here. We don't know what the first statement is saying, and we don't know what the second statement is saying. The only thing we know is that they're opposites. So some could think that they're the same. And the former term actually refers to something different. And unfortunately in this question, and I like this example now, these could also be different up here and the same. So this is difficult. We got to find an option like that. Hopefully they'll only give us one that works. So we look at this and we see parallel and identical. Those are similar words. They mean the same thing. Precise and exact, those mean the same thing. Interchangeable, meaning same, so they can be exchanged for one another. And a particular group of, those are different. So we can look at that, that looks good. Exclusive and separate, those are the same. Useful and useless. Okay, well those are different, so let's look at that for a second there. Let's look at these both in the sentence. Although some think that the terms bug and insect are interchangeable, so the same, over here, the former term usually refers to a particular group of insects. That makes perfect sense. Although some think that the terms bug and insect are useful, the former term actually refers to a useless group of insects. This would be what I would call a irrelevant set of terms. It doesn't make sense in the sentence. We have our answer. It is interchangeable and a particular. So we've just answered two logic-based questions. Let's go to what, in my opinion, are the harder questions, which are the vocab-based questions. These really do require you to have more knowledge of the words themselves. So there is no doubt that Larry is a genuine blank. He excels at telling stories that fascinate his listeners. Here's our first clause. Here's our second clause. Basically, this word is going to be defined as someone that excels at telling stories. Pretty simple, right? So let's find the word that defines that. We have braggarts, dilettante. Wow, that is some impressive lightning. We have braggart, we have dilettante, I don't even know how to pronounce that, pilferer, prevaricator, and raconteur. I think that's French. Yeah, this is hard. I cannot even tell you the exact definition of any of these. But the cool thing is, we could use the same systems from before. I really even shouldn't have looked at these. He excels at telling stories. What's a single word, not a phrase, that we can use to define this? I guess it'd be pretty obvious to use storyteller, so let's use storyteller. Pretend I had done that first. Alright, now we're looking at our answers here. We need to narrow it down. So we have braggart, dilettante, pilferer. I know that pilfer means to take things. I'm pretty sure a pilferer is not what he is. This looks familiar. Pre, meaning before. Varicate, which means, I think it means to incite. I don't know. When I think of the word avarice, I think of anger. And I could be completely wrong, but the word pre, but meaning before, probably doesn't apply to something like storytelling. So let's go ahead and say that this one doesn't make any sense. I like this one. This one has the word brag in it. And brag sounds like a lot of talking, and talking sounds like he'd be good at telling stories. So I'm going to give this a check. A dilettante, I don't know what that is. I'm going to give it a question mark. And a raconteur, I don't know what that is. So I'm going to give this a question mark. I'm going to tell you the truth. When I did this question, I actually did not get it right. I fell for the brag, selected it, and then I was wrong. I'm going to show you why knowing your roots in different languages is extremely important. It actually doesn't take a lot of time to study. The correct answer to this question was raconteur. And I'm going to show you why in a second. Braggart and dilettante apply to completely different situations, and braggart actually has nothing to do with what I was talking about. A raconteur, if that's even how you pronounce it, I have the definition of right here. So here's the question, here's the definition. It is a noun and it says a person who is skilled in relating stories and anecdotes interestingly. I would say that that makes sense as the answer. Now, it actually said it comes from France, or from French in the 19th century, and it comes from raconte, which is to tell in the old French language. The coolest part about this is, you look at the roots, it gave us the word raconter, or to account. When you think of an account, that is a story. This is something that we could have used to solve this question. So if we had just kept that in mind, we might have been able to solve this. Because look back at the original question down here. We have account right there. If I had known the root raconter from French, then I would have been able to solve that. You might be thinking, oh man, how am I going to memorize so many roots? All you need to do is know how to break apart words into their basic concepts, into their basic words. And that's going to make it easier for you to solve these questions. Here is another example. So, a discerning publishing agent can blank, promising material from a mass of submissions. separating the good from the bad. Once again, one clause and another much larger clause. Separating the good from the bad. So whatever this word is, this verb, that's going to mean separating the good from the bad because that comma tells us it is. So all we're going to do is choose a word that makes sense. So filter. Filter, promising material from a master submission. That makes sense. So let's look at this. Supplant, dramatize, finagle, winnow, overhaul. So we're looking at these answers, and I know for a fact dramatize makes no sense in this sentence. I can get rid of that. Overhaul makes no sense. Finagle, I know the definition of, which is to quickly use your, well, I guess it's to kind of, actually, I don't have the exact definition, but it's to inefficiently skim your way through something to come to an answer without great effectivity or efficiencies. So I don't think that makes sense, except for the fact that there's a massive submissions. I'm going to give that a, a maybe. Supplant makes no sense in this definition. The only one that's left is one that I actually really don't know about. So let's think about our roots here. Once again, I chose an extremely difficult question because I think it'll prove how important it is for you to memorize your roots. These are questions from an actual SAT, so these are words that you may come across. When I think of winnow, I think of kind of sifting your way through something. And actually, sifting is a good word too, because it looks like the word filter, it works with the sentence. So I'm going to say that because finagle doesn't make a lot of sense and the others make no sense, I'm just going to guess it. I don't even know what it means, but I'm going to guess it by rule of elimination. Turns out that I was actually correct. The term winnow means to free grain from lighter particles of chaff and dirt. What? How on earth are we supposed to know this? This is why I don't like the SAT. But there are other definitions that it uses. The most important one is going to be right here, which is to separate or distinguish valuable from worthless parts. That makes it the correct answer. What are the roots here? It comes from Middle English, which comes from basically the word Windian, which is where we get the word wind, because remember it uses wind to remove the chaff and dirt. Now, for you to make that connection would be really impressive, but I really hope it proves that you have to learn your roots if you're going to succeed on this test. Winnow sounded right. Now, if we'd known the roots, we would have known that it was correct instantly. But in the end, it was knowing the rest of these words from their roots that allowed us to solve it correctly. So, those are some sample problems for you. Remember that it's important for you to keep these things in mind. It's time for our review. The first thing that we looked at was vocabulary and context questions. Remember that all of these have two clauses, one which defines the others. They're always going to be good answers, so make sure you choose the best. And remember, there might be a negative or an opposite inside, so be sure to pay attention to that. Remember donut, donut, write it down or something. Don't look at the answers, choose your best option, then look at it and start narrowing it down. Utilize your conjunctions, such as the words although or the buzzwords we looked at, and then you'll have your answer. In logic-based questions, it's very similar, but in most ways it can actually be easier because one statement is going to define the other. You don't even have to know a lot of vocab roots. Be sure that both of the statements are correct. And in fact, you can eliminate answers if only one of the words is correct. Is incorrect, which we did right here. And then to win, all you do is use the same acronym, use the donut. Trust me, not looking at the answers will make it harder for you to be distracted by the words that they give you. Finally, know your buzzwords. It's pretty easy because when you read it, you naturally think to yourself, oh, this is different, or oh, this is the same. But sometimes if you're reading quickly enough, or if you're too nervous, you're going to skip over one simple word that could completely change up the meaning of the sentence, and we proved that by changing one of the sentences back then. Here's how you're going to study for some of these questions. Very simple checklist I have for you. To get ready for the vocab-in-context questions, do not go and memorize words. Please don't do that. I don't want you getting out of this that you need to go home and open up a dictionary and just start memorizing words. It can be interesting, usually it's not. Here's what you need to do, learn roots. There are tons of vocabulary books that are memorized from roots. Just Google it online or find something that you need, or look into some of these SAT prep books that give you that opportunity. Memorizing roots will set you up. Remember when we looked at philanthropist and the word philos? This is the Greek root for love. That tells me a whole lot about the word, and it's only half of the word. It's really easy for you to keep that in mind and use that in your test. Then, practice dissecting or parsing words to find similar words. Let's say that one of the options you were looking at was inquisitive. You look inquisitive. What does that mean? Inquisitive, okay, so that sounds like quiz. I think that's quiz. Or actually, you know, it kind of sounds like question. And if you were to take that guess, a large deal of the time you would actually be correct. This means someone who is, you know, a person that asks a lot of questions. Then, practice SAT questions. Find ones that you can use. I pulled some off the internet. You can find some on the College Board website. But use them because it's important to learn to answer not in your own way or in your own words, but according to the answers they give you. It's a whole different way of thinking. Then, here's how you're going to study for some logic-based questions. 1, learn how to recognize buzzwords. You're going to find a sentence, and the first thing you should be paying attention to is the set of 2 clauses and the conjunction in between. Is it a but? Is it an or? Is it a nor? Is it an either? Is it a both? Then, you're done. Practice SAT questions. It's a really simple checklist, so please, look at this, look at this. At the end of this video, I'm going to give you a link that'll take you to some of the places where you can learn these roots for this, and to practice some of these logic-based questions. So, that is your look at the vocabulary section. All of the questions that'll appear in the first parts of each of the critical reading sections. Please work hard on this section in particular for studying, because it is important that you have practice in these areas, because if you spend too long on these sections, you won't have enough time to get to the passage reading parts. I'll make a video for that in the future. But until then, my name is Nathan Eloquent, and this is the SAT Blitz. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it, send it to friends if it's useful, play it again if you need to, and please tell me what I need to do in future videos or certain questions that you want me to tackle for you. That is all. Once again, this is Nathan Eloquent with the SAT Blitz, and I hope you liked it. See ya. Welcome back to the Blitz. I'm your host, Nathan So instead, let's look at some vocab rules we can use to beat the vocab section. Let's look at some tools that we can use to beat the vocab section.